My name is Adriana Wilson, and I am 32 years old. If you saw our family from the outside, you might think we were the picture of suburban stability. A three-bedroom house in Pennsylvania, a tidy lawn, holidays filled with smiling photographs. But if you looked closer, past the polished veneer of church services and neighborhood cookouts, you'd see the fractures. And if you lived inside those walls, like I did, you'd feel the favoritism seeping into every meal, every whispered comparison, every choice that shaped who I became. My father, Richard, was the kind of man who pressed his shirts with military precision, his leather briefcase always in reach. A bank manager who believed in order, numbers, and legacy. My mother, Diane, worked long shifts as a nurse at the hospital, often returning home with weary eyes and stories she never quite told in full. And then there was Brian, my older brother by 3 years, the golden child, the chosen one. From the time we were children, it was clear Brian was destined for greatness. I was an afterthought. When Brian scraped by with a C+ in algebra, Dad clapped his back and said, "That's my boy. Numbers don't scare him." When I came home with a report card full of A's, it was treated as the bare minimum. My mother would glance at it, murmur, "Good job, honey," and return to stirring dinner. I remember one evening so vividly it's burned into my memory. Brian had just received his acceptance letter to the state university, with only a partial scholarship, but you would have thought he'd been crowned King of England. Balloons, streamers, my parents even tapped into their savings to surprise him with a shiny, used car in the driveway. The pride in my father's eyes was blinding. Meanwhile, when I mentioned I wanted to apply to design programs, real colleges with names people recognized, my father cut me off with a sharp shake of his head. "Be practical, Adriana. Art doesn't pay bills. Nursing or business, that's what keeps a roof over your head." That phrase, "keeps a roof over your head," became his mantra, wielded like a weapon against any dream that didn't fit his narrow vision. By the time I was 16, I was juggling high school honors classes and 20 hours a week at the local diner, scraping together tips just to save for college. My brother, meanwhile, spent summers at sports camps my parents proudly funded. When I asked why there wasn't money for me, my mother simply said, "Your brother needs a head start. You're independent. You'll manage." I did manage, but every shift at that diner left me smelling of grease and syrup, watching other families laugh in booths while I served them coffee with a practiced smile. The only place I felt truly seen was at my grandmother Margaret's cottage. Grandma Margaret was my mother's mother, a woman who had survived the loss of her husband at 40 and raised 3 children, mostly alone. Her little home sat an hour outside the city, surrounded by a wild but enchanting garden. To me, it was another world. Sunlight through lace curtains, the smell of bread baking, the quiet strength of a woman who refused to let hardship define her. I would spend weeks with her every summer, escaping the suffocating air of favoritism back home. She taught me how to plant tomatoes, her weathered hands guiding mine into the soil. "Adriana," she told me once, her eyes sharp and steady, "never let anyone else tell you your worth. Only you decide that. And never depend on someone else for shelter. Learn to build your own." I didn't know then how much I'd cling to those words. As high school drew to a close, the pressure in our household thickened. My mother decided I should become a nurse, just like me, she said, smiling as though it were already settled. "It's stable, it's respected, and you'll always have work." I swallowed hard, my throat burning with the words I wanted to say. I don't want to spend my life in fluorescent hospital corridors. But my father piled on, his tone blunt. "Creative careers are for people with trust funds. Stick to something real." They didn't know, or maybe they didn't care, that I had discovered my passion in digital design. My high school art teacher, Ms. Winters, had pulled me aside after class once. She'd held up a project I'd created on an old school computer. "You have an eye for composition most professionals spend years developing," she said. That one sentence lit a fire in me. I started staying late after school, experimenting with programs, entering local competitions. And when I won a regional design award, I floated home with the certificate clutched to my chest, only to hear my father mutter, "Nice hobby. Now, back to reality." The night of college application decisions is still sharp in my memory. Acceptance letters spread across the dining table like fragile lifelines. Community college with a strong design program, a few state schools with affordable arts tracks. I was giddy, possibility humming in my chest. But my father's voice cut through it like a blade. We're not wasting a dime on art. If you want an education in design, you'll pay for it yourself. I turned to my mother, desperate for even the faintest flicker of support. She couldn't meet my eyes. Across the table, Brian smirked, swirling soda in his glass. Maybe you should listen to Dad, Adriana. Not everyone's cut out for a real career. I went to bed that night with tears soaking my pillow, the weight of rejection pressing into my ribs. But when morning came, something hardened inside me. A decision. At breakfast, I placed my community college acceptance letter on the table. I'm going, I said quietly but firmly. I'll work, I'll pay my own way, and I'll study design. My father barely looked up from his paper. Your life, your mistake. And just like that, the divide between us became a canyon. By the time I graduated high school, I was already living half in defiance and half in desperation. I rented a tiny apartment with 2 roommates, working almost 40 hours a week between a coffee shop and a retail job at the mall. I studied at night, bleary-eyed but determined. Every time exhaustion threatened to swallow me, I heard Grandma Margaret's voice. Never depend on someone else for shelter. Build your own. I clung to that mantra when my parents skipped my graduation, choosing instead to attend a financial conference with Brian. I clung to it when I hugged Grandma Margaret, her frail body leaning on a walker, and saw her smile wider than the sun as I crossed the stage alone. She was my only witness that day, my only family who truly saw me. And as I stepped off that stage, clutching my degree with trembling hands, I made myself a silent promise. I would build a life on my own terms, no matter how much it cost me. What I didn't know was how high that cost would become. College life for me wasn't late-night parties or leisurely afternoons sprawled across the quad. It was exhaustion, the smell of burnt coffee, and the rattle of coins scraped together to buy instant noodles. I spent 2 years at community college, pouring myself into design classes. My portfolio grew. Logos, posters, websites, digital illustrations, and my GPA held steady at a 3.8, despite the hours I worked behind cash registers. Still, at family dinners, those rare occasions I dared to show up, I was invisible. One Thanksgiving, I brought a folder of my latest projects, hoping maybe, just maybe, my father would see that my hobby was becoming a career. He glanced at one page, frowned, and muttered, "So, you draw cartoons?" Brian, sitting at the head of the table as though he'd earned the throne, chuckled. "Don't waste your time, Dad. She's going to figure it out when the bills pile up." The turkey on my plate turned to sawdust in my mouth. That was the last holiday I attended for years. The only person who celebrated me was Grandma Margaret. Every time I visited her cottage, she asked to see my designs. She'd run her thin fingers across the glossy prints, her eyes shining. "This is talent, Adriana," she whispered. "And talent paired with grit? That's unstoppable." Her faith kept me alive when the rest of my family's words sliced me down. By 20, I had earned enough credits and scraped together enough scholarships to transfer to a state university. The day I received my acceptance letter, I called Grandma before anyone else. She laughed through the phone, the sound like music. "I told you, child, you build your own shelter, one brick at a time." The transition wasn't easy. The university campus buzzed with students who had parents wiring them rent money or paying for meal plans. I was juggling 40 hours of work between a coffee shop and a clothing store at the mall. My alarm rang at 5:30 a.m., most days. Some nights, I'd sit in the back row of a lecture hall, my eyelids heavy, wondering if my father was right, that maybe I was making a mistake. But then I'd pull up my projects on my laptop and see the sparks of something undeniable. Design made me feel alive. It was the first thing in my life that was mine alone. When graduation came, my parents didn't bother showing up. They had flown out to attend a finance conference with Brian. I stood in the crowd of caps and gowns, scanning the audience until my eyes landed on a single familiar figure. Grandma Margaret, 82 years old, her hands wrapped around a walker, but her smile, God, that smile, was brighter than the sun. When I crossed the stage, clutching my degree, I searched for her eyes. She mouthed the words, "I'm proud of you." That moment meant more than any applause. After the ceremony, we sat together outside beneath a tree. She pulled out 2 paper cups of coffee, her hands trembling slightly. "So, what's next?" she asked. I swallowed hard, staring at the diploma in my lap. "Philadelphia. There's an internship at a design firm. It's nothing glamorous, but it's a start." Her eyes softened. "Are you scared?" "Yes," I admitted. "What if they're right? What if I fail?" She reached for my hand. her grip surprisingly firm. Adriana, the only true failure is living someone else's dream. You follow your own heart, and if you fall, you get back up. You'll always have me. Those words became my compass. I packed my car the next morning with everything I owned: 2 suitcases of clothes, a secondhand laptop, a portfolio case, and more fear than I could carry. I hugged Grandma goodbye, inhaling the scent of lavender on her sweater, and promised to visit as often as I could. The drive into the city felt like crossing an invisible line. The houses shrank, the buildings grew taller, the traffic denser. My new apartment was a 2-bedroom in a worn-down complex, shared with a stranger I met through a roommate finder ad. Jessica was a teacher, practical, funny, and far more stable than I felt. We bonded quickly, decorating our shabby apartment with thrift store finds and peeling posters. It wasn't glamorous, but it was ours. The internship turned into long hours for little pay, but I didn't care. I soaked in everything: the smell of printers, the click of keyboards, the endless drafts and revisions. When I landed a junior designer position after a year, my chest ached with pride. Still, the shadow of my family loomed. Whenever I called home, conversations with my mother were stiff. She would slip me a $20 bill when we saw each other, like I was still a child who couldn't feed herself. My father's only question was always the same: "So, how much are you making now?" It was never enough for them, never impressive enough. Meanwhile, Brian's career soared. He was promoted at his financial firm, bought a condo downtown. At family gatherings, his achievements were paraded while mine were ignored. I stopped showing up altogether. It was easier not to sit in a room where I was a ghost. Instead, I found belonging in late-night pizza runs with Jessica, in weekend phone calls with Grandma, in the quiet hum of my computer screen as I built a portfolio brick by brick. Life wasn't easy, but it was mine. And I believed, naively, that maybe I had finally outrun the weight of my family's rejection. What I didn't realize was that life has a way of knocking you down the moment you start to breathe easy. That the ground beneath me was far more fragile than I understood. Because just a few years later, everything would come crashing down. The thing about stability is how fragile it really is. One minute you're climbing, holding your breath with hope. The next, the ladder snaps beneath you. It began with a Monday morning in the middle of October. I showed up at the design agency, coffee in hand, portfolio tucked under my arm, ready to tackle the week. But the door was locked. A white sheet of paper flapped against the glass. Bankruptcy filed, office closed. My stomach dropped. I pressed my forehead against the glass, peering inside at the dimly lit office that had once been my second home. The computers were gone. The desks were stripped. Just like that, months of long nights and grinding hours erased by a few sentences on a page. The city was brutal in those months. Companies tightened budgets. Freelancers like me were the first to be cut. I sent out dozens of applications, knocked on doors, emailed every contact I had. Some interviews went well, but the follow-up calls never came. Meanwhile, my savings, already thin, evaporated. Rent devoured what little remained. Jessica, my roommate, covered utilities when I couldn't, sliding her leftover cafeteria food onto my plate at night. But even she had limits. By spring, she announced she was moving in with her boyfriend. "I'm sorry, Adriana," she whispered, guilt in her eyes. "I can't cover for both of us." I nodded, forcing a smile, but inside, panic clawed at my chest. Alone, there was no way I could pay full rent. Then the eviction notice came, bold red letters taped to my door, demanding payment I didn't have. I held the paper in trembling hands, feeling the walls of the apartment close in around me. I thought of my grandmother's words: never depend on someone else for shelter. Build your own. But at that moment, I had nothing to build with. In desperation, I dialed my parents' number. The phone rang 4 times before my mother answered, her voice distracted. "Hello? Mom, it's me," I said, already fighting tears. "Adriana, hold on," I heard her call out. "Richard, it's Adriana." Then silence as I explained, haltingly, ashamed, that I'd lost my job, that I was being evicted, that I just needed a little help to cover rent until I found steady work. I promised I'd pay it back with interest. I just needed time. The silence on the line stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. Finally, my father's voice came through, flat, cold. "This is exactly what we warned you about. Your unstable career path, playing around with design instead of choosing something real." "Dad, please," I whispered. "I have interviews lined up." I just need somewhere to stay or enough for 1 month's rent. Please." My mother cut in, her tone clipped. "We're already supporting Brian with his MBA tuition. We don't have extra funds right now." That was a lie. I knew it. There was always money for Brian. What they meant was, "We don't have money for you." "You made your bed," my father said. "Now lie in it. Maybe this will teach you to make practical decisions." Then the line went dead. I stared at my phone, my breath caught in my throat, tears spilling down my cheeks. I called again. No answer. Again. Voicemail. Again. Straight to busy tone. That night, I sat on the floor of my apartment surrounded by half-packed boxes. I cried until my chest hurt, until my eyes swelled shut, until exhaustion claimed me like a thief. The next morning, I tried my grandmother's number. No answer. The following day, I learned she was in the hospital with pneumonia. I wanted to visit her, to hold her hand, but I couldn't. I didn't have the money for the trip, or anywhere safe to leave my belongings. 2 weeks later, the landlord changed the locks. Jessica helped me load what little I could fit into my 12-year-old Honda Civic, my laptop, a suitcase of clothes, some design equipment. The rest went into a dingy storage unit I paid for with my last $100. That night, I parked in my parents' driveway, rain streaking across my windshield. Through the living room window, I could see them on the couch, laughing at the television, warm and dry. I sat there for 20 minutes, my palms sweaty on the steering wheel, rehearsing the words I'd say. Finally, I gathered the courage and rang the bell. My father opened the door. His expression shifted from surprise to irritation the moment he saw me. "Adriana, what are you doing here?" "Dad, I lost the apartment. I just need a place to stay, a few weeks, until I find work." My voice cracked. "Please." He looked past me at my car, packed to the brim, his lip curled. This is exactly what happens with artistic careers. Instability. "Richard, who is it?" My mother appeared behind him, her eyes narrowing. "Our daughter seems to have found herself homeless," he said, as though it were an amusing observation. "I'm not homeless," I said quickly, though the word was starting to feel real. I just need family right now." My father crossed his arms, blocking the doorway. "You chose your path. You chose to ignore our guidance. Now you need to live with the consequences." "We're hosting the neighborhood association meeting tomorrow," my mother added. "This really isn't a good time." "A good time?" I whispered, rain dripping from my hair, my heart pounding. "You're turning away your own daughter." "You made it clear you didn't need us," my father said sharply, "so don't come crawling back now." Then he closed the door. I stood on that porch as the rain soaked through my jacket, shivering, waiting for them to change their minds, to open the door and let me in. They didn't. Eventually, I stumbled back to my car. That was my first night sleeping in a Walmart parking lot. For 2 weeks, my car became my home. I showered at a gym where I had a membership. I used public library computers to send job applications. I ate dollar menu fast food when I had coins to spare. At night, the silence in the car pressed down on me until I could barely breathe. I left voicemail after voicemail for my parents, my voice growing hoarse from begging. None were returned. One evening, driving past their house, I saw Brian's car in the driveway. They were all together, laughing, living, while I sat in the dark, invisible. The rage that rose in me that night was unlike anything I'd ever felt. It started cold, deep in my chest, then spread until my hands shook on the steering wheel. How could they? How could people who raised me, who smiled for family portraits, let me rot in a parking lot while they passed mashed potatoes across a dinner table? That was the moment something inside me broke. I realized I didn't have a family anymore. And I swore to myself, if I survived this, I would never again beg for love from people who refused to give it. By the second week of living in my car, I had stopped keeping track of days. Mornings bled into nights, nights into mornings. My body ached from sleeping curled in the driver's seat. My skin smelled faintly of mildew. No matter how often I scrubbed at the gym showers, and my reflection in the mirror looked like a stranger, hollow-eyed, defeated. One bitter November morning, I sat in a corner booth of a coffee shop with my laptop open, nursing a single cup of tea I could barely afford. I pretended to work, but really I was just stealing their Wi-Fi, scrolling through job listings I'd already applied to 10 times. I didn't even notice her approach until I heard my name. "Adriana? Adriana Wilson?" My head snapped up. Standing there in a crisp pea coat holding a steaming latte was Eleanor Garcia, a former colleague from the agency. Her dark hair framed her face perfectly, her eyes wide with recognition. "Eleanor," I stammered, instantly aware of the grease-stained hoodie I was wearing. Wow, hi. I thought that was you. She slid into the booth across from me without waiting for permission. I've been trying to track you down since the agency shut down. Everyone's scattered. How are you holding up? The question hit like a knife. I considered lying, telling her I was freelancing, that things were fine, but the words crumbled in my throat. Not exactly great, I admitted. My voice shook. I lost my apartment. Been living, well, in my car. Eleanor's expression softened. She reached across the table, her hand covering mine. Why didn't you reach out? We were a team. Because I didn't want anyone to know how badly I was failing, I whispered. Everyone else seemed to land on their feet, and my throat closed. She shook her head. Trust me, Adriana, everyone struggled. I was unemployed for 6 weeks before I found something. You're not alone. Her words pierced the fog of shame like sunlight through clouds. When was the last time you ate a real meal? She asked suddenly, her tone sharp. I blinked, embarrassed. I don't remember. Come on. She stood, leaving no room for argument. Pack up. You're coming with me. I tried to protest. Eleanor, you don't have to. Yes, I do. Her voice was firm. Get your stuff. Half an hour later, I was standing in her warm apartment, the smell of soup filling the air. Eleanor handed me a bowl, watched until I ate every spoonful, then led me to a small spare bedroom. It's not much, she said, setting fresh towels on the dresser, but it has a real bed, and it's yours for as long as you need it. Tears blurred my vision. I can't accept this. We were just coworkers. No, she corrected gently. We were a team, and now we're friends. Friends help each other. For the first time in months, I slept in a real bed. Sheets tucked under my chin, warmth cocooning me. I wept silently until sleep claimed me. The next morning, Eleanor introduced me to her boyfriend, Michael, who ran a small web design studio. He reviewed my portfolio over breakfast and smiled. I can't make promises, he said, but we need someone to help with UI graphics. Come by the studio tomorrow. We'll talk. It wasn't a rescue, not yet, but it was the first spark of possibility. That evening, as I helped Eleanor tidy the kitchen, my phone buzzed with a call from an unfamiliar number. Is this Adriana Wilson? An older woman's voice asked when I answered. Yes. This is Nancy Holden. I'm your grandmother's neighbor. I've been trying to reach you. Your grandmother, she's not well. She's in the hospital. The doctors, they don't think she has much time. My heart stopped. She's been asking for you, Nancy continued softly. If you can, you should come. The phone nearly slipped from my hand. Guilt slammed into me. In my spiral of survival, I had barely checked in. My grandmother, my anchor, was fading, and I wasn't there. I'll come, I said, my voice cracking. I'll come tonight. Eleanor didn't hesitate. I'll drive you, she said firmly, grabbing her keys. The 3-hour trip felt endless. My hands fidgeted in my lap, my mind replaying every conversation with my grandmother, every smile, every piece of advice. I prayed silently the whole way. Please, let me see her one more time. When we finally reached the hospital, it was just after 9. The sterile smell of disinfectant burned my nose as I hurried down the corridor. There she was, frail, pale, her chest rising shallowly under the oxygen mask. But her eyes lit up the moment she saw me. My Adriana, she whispered, her voice faint but steady. I knew you'd come. I clasped her hand, feeling the thin skin, the bones beneath. I'm here, Grandma. I'm here. I stayed with her all night, telling her about the job lead, about Eleanor's kindness. I didn't mention the car, the hunger, the rejection from my parents. She didn't need to know that. She needed peace. At dawn, she motioned for Nancy to hand me a small box from her purse. Inside was a key and a folded document. My will, she said softly. The cottage, it's yours, always meant for you. Tears streamed down my face. No, Grandma, you'll get better. You'll go home. She shook her head gently, her eyes fierce despite the weakness of her body. Listen, you have the strength. Brian has your parents, but you need roots. This house, this garden, they're yours now. I held her hand until morning. 2 days later, she passed away peacefully in her sleep. The grief was unbearable, sharp, suffocating, endless. But her words, her faith, her gift, they became the lifeline I would cling to in the storm that was still to come. Grief has a strange texture. It's heavy, like wet wool draped over your shoulders, but it also cuts sharp, like glass beneath your skin. That's how it felt standing at my grandmother's funeral, the November sky, gray and low, the bare branches rattling in the cold wind. My parents were there, of course, looking appropriately solemn in black, but their eyes never truly touched mine. Brian stood beside them, his arm around my mother's shoulder, as though he were the dutiful son holding the family together. I stayed a few steps apart, clutching the folded handkerchief Eleanor had pressed into my palm. The real fracture came during the reading of the will. We sat in a cramped law office, the scent of old paper and stale coffee hanging in the air. My father sat stiffly in his chair, arms crossed. My mother twisted her hands in her lap. Brian scrolled his phone, smirking as though he already knew how this would go. But then the lawyer read the words, "I leave my home, my savings, and the contents therein to my granddaughter, Adriana Wilson." The silence that followed was deafening. My mother's face crumpled, tears spilling instantly. "She always favored you," she whispered, her voice edged with accusation. My father's jaw tightened, a storm gathering behind his eyes. Brian snapped his head up from his phone, his smirk gone. I sat frozen, the key and documents heavy in my trembling hands. I hadn't wanted this. Not like this, not at the cost of losing her. But it was her last gift to me, her belief in me made tangible. When the meeting ended, my mother cornered me outside the office. "She should have thought of the whole family. We're struggling too, Adriana. That house was meant to stay in the family, not just with you." I swallowed the words I wanted to hurl back. Instead, I said quietly, "Grandma made her choice." And for the first time in my life, I didn't bend to their disapproval. The cottage was waiting for me like a patient friend. It smelled of lavender sachets and old wood, of bread and garden soil, but it also smelled of absence. Every room carried echoes of my grandmother, the armchair where she read novels, the kitchen where she kneaded dough, the garden where her laughter still seemed to float among the roses. The first night I stayed there alone, I curled up on the couch with one of her blankets and cried until I was empty. Then I walked the creaking floorboards and whispered into the silence, "I'll take care of it. I promise." Eleanor helped me move in, lugging boxes, scrubbing countertops, even planting a small pot of daisies by the window. "It has good bones," she said, surveying the peeling wallpaper and dated appliances. "And amazing light. You're going to make this place yours." And she was right. Little by little, I breathed life back into the house. I turned the small front room into a makeshift office, setting up my laptop and sketchbooks. I painted walls, tore up old carpets, polished wood floors until they shone. The overgrown garden became my therapy. At first, I didn't know the names of half the plants, but I learned, through books, through trial and error, through whispered memory of my grandmother's lessons. On Saturday mornings, I'd sit on the porch swing with coffee, watching the mist lift from the garden, feeling, for the first time in years, safe. Work trickled in, too. Michael gave me freelance assignments, small projects that gradually grew into steady contracts. My portfolio expanded. Clients began recommending me to others, and my bank account, while still fragile, stopped hovering at zero. Life was no longer survival. It was rebuilding. And slowly the cottage drew people to me. It started with Mrs. Jenkins, the neighbor who'd watched over my grandmother. She appeared on my doorstep one evening with a casserole. "Welcome home," she said simply, as though I had always belonged here. Then came Tom from the hardware store, who set aside antique knobs he thought might match my cabinets. A florist in town offered me cuttings for the garden. The bookstore owner, Patrick Lewis, began striking up conversations when I lingered too long in the shop's cafe. "You're going to wear that design book out," he teased one afternoon as I flipped through the same volume I'd been eyeing for weeks. "Can't afford it yet," I admitted with a sheepish grin. The next day, it was wrapped in brown paper behind the counter with a note, "Renovation consultant fee." Patrick had kind eyes and an easy laugh. He talked about books the way some people talk about love, carefully, reverently, as if each story carried a heartbeat. When he learned about my grandmother, he didn't offer pity. He just sat with me on the porch one evening, sipping tea, and said, "She sounds like someone worth carrying forward." And just like that, the loneliness I had carried for so long began to crack. Still, shadows lingered. At night, as I tucked away invoices or sketched out logos for clients, I sometimes imagined my father's voice sneering in the back of my mind. "It's not a real career. It won't last." I would close my eyes, press my hands flat against the solid wood desk in my grandmother's house, and whisper back, "Watch me." A year passed, then two. Elevation Designs, my own small studio, was born out of that tiny office, focusing on branding for local businesses. My clients grew, my income steadied, and with each improvement to the cottage, the new heating system, the repainted kitchen cabinets, the blooming garden, I felt myself laying bricks of a life I had built entirely on my own terms. For the first time, I allowed myself to believe I had found peace. But peace, I would learn, has a way of drawing storms to its doorstep. Because just when the house finally felt like home, my past came knocking again, in the form of an email with a subject line that made my stomach twist. The email sat in my inbox like a snake coiled in the grass. Touching base, dear Adriana, it's been too long. I came across your design company website. Impressive work. Mom and Dad say they haven't heard from you and are concerned. Let's catch up soon. Brian. My finger hovered over the delete button. 5 years of silence, 5 years of ignored calls when I was homeless. And now, touching base? The words tasted fake. Patrick read it over my shoulder at lunch. He raised an eyebrow. Sounds like someone wants something. People don't break 5 years of silence just to say hi. I knew he was right. The timing, the tone, it all reeked of hidden motives. I decided not to respond. But the silence didn't last. 3 days later, my phone rang. The caller ID read, Mom and Dad. My breath caught, and before I could stop myself, I answered. Adriana, darling, my mother's voice rang out, unnaturally bright. It's so good to finally hear your voice. Mom, I said flatly, this is unexpected. Well, we've been thinking of you so much lately. Brian mentioned he reached out and didn't hear back. We were worried. I've been busy. Running a business takes a lot of time. Yes, we saw your website. Very impressive, honey. The praise sounded hollow, like a rehearsed line. Your father and I were just saying how proud we are of what you've accomplished. The words lodged in my throat. Proud? Where was that pride when I needed a roof? When I begged for help and you hung up? Anyway, she continued quickly, we feel terrible about the misunderstandings in the past. Family is so important, and we'd love to reconnect. Perhaps we could come visit you soon. Misunderstandings? I echoed, my voice edged with steel. Is that what you call turning away your daughter when she was homeless? A pause. Then her voice dropped, lower, controlled. We all made mistakes, Adriana. We were going through difficult times ourselves, but that's in the past. We should focus on rebuilding our relationship. I couldn't tell if it was guilt or strategy. Either way, it didn't sit right. I ended the call without committing to anything. That evening, another call came, this time from Brian. Hey, sis. His cheer sounded forced. Mom said you two spoke. Great that we're all reconnecting. Why the sudden family reunion interest, Brian? I asked directly. He laughed, the sound brittle. Can't a brother just want to catch up? Silence stretched until he sighed. Fine. Things have been tough. I made a few bad investments, lost a lot. The condo's gone. Dad's out of the bank, early retirement, some management issues. And Mom's back problems keep her from working full shifts. We've downsized a lot. I felt a pang of sympathy despite everything. I'm sorry to hear that. I know how hard that must be. Yeah, well, family has to stick together in tough times, right? His words dripped with irony. Anyway, we were thinking we could come by next weekend, see Grandma's place, reconnect. Every instinct screamed, don't do it, but a part of me wanted to face them, to see what game they were playing. So I agreed on one condition. Lunch. Just lunch. No overnight stays. Patrick didn't hesitate when I told him. Do you want me there? Yes, I admitted. I think I'll need backup. The following Saturday, they arrived. My mother's arms wrapped around me in a teary embrace, her perfume overwhelming. My father's handshake was firm, his eyes scanning the cottage with undisguised curiosity. Brian lingered at the doorway, gaze darting from the garden to the new appliances to the polished wood floors. You've done wonders with the place, my mother said, her tone both complimentary and calculating. It's so much nicer than when your grandmother lived here. I bristled. She kept it perfectly nice. I've just updated a few things. Must have cost a fortune, my father remarked, tapping the counter. Seems like your little design business is doing well. Elevation Designs is doing very well, Patrick interjected smoothly, stepping into the room. Adriana has clients across 3 states. My father's eyes narrowed at his presence. And you are? Patrick Lewis. I own the bookstore in town. I've known Adriana since she moved here. Lunch was tense. They alternated between forced compliments and subtle hints about their struggles. My mother mentioned their cramped apartment 3 times. My father asked pointed questions about the cottage's heating system and roof. Brian stayed mostly quiet except for his eyes, always roving, lingering too long, calculating. At one point, he asked to use the bathroom. When he returned, his phone was in his hand. "Good reception here," he said casually, sliding it into his pocket. After they left, Patrick helped me clear the table. He glanced at me, frowning. "Did you notice your brother taking pictures of every room?" My stomach sank. I replayed the image in my mind. Brian's phone raised in the hallway. "I saw it too," I whispered. "And your father asking about property values?" Patrick shook his head. "They're planning something. Be careful." That night, I installed security cameras around the cottage. Because deep down, I knew he was right. This wasn't about family. This was about the house. And the storm was only beginning. 3 weeks after that uneasy lunch, I packed my bags for a design conference in Boston. It was supposed to be a fresh start, a chance to showcase elevation designs, meet new clients, and feel for once like I had finally made it. I left Patrick with a spare key, though he warned he'd only be able to swing by occasionally with the bookstore keeping him busy. "Don't worry," I assured him. "The cameras will handle the rest." The first day of the conference went well. I networked, handed out business cards, even booked a tentative contract. For the first time in months, my chest felt light. Then came the text that shattered it all. "Thought you weren't back until tomorrow. Just saw lights on in your cottage. People moving inside. Everything okay?" It was from Mrs. Jenkins, my grandmother's old neighbor. My blood ran cold. I called her instantly. "Mrs. Jenkins, it's Adriana. I'm still in Boston. No one should be in the house." "Oh dear," she whispered. "Do you want me to call the police?" My hands trembled as I opened the security camera app. "No, let me check first." The screen loaded, and there it was, my father's car in the driveway. 3 figures unloading boxes, my father jamming something into the back door lock, then ushering my mother and Brian inside. My throat closed. They weren't visiting. They were moving in. I called Patrick immediately. "They've broken into the house. They're unloading their stuff right now." "I'll drive over," he said, his voice grim. "Should I call the police?" "Not yet. Let me try them first." With shaking fingers, I dialed my father. He looked at the screen, then deliberately declined. I tried my mother. Declined. Brian. Straight to voicemail. Finally, I dialed the landline I'd installed in the cottage. After several rings, Brian's voice answered, smooth, casual. "Hello, Wilson residents." The words made my vision blur with rage. "Brian, what the hell are you doing in my house?" A pause, then a sigh. "We were going to call you tomorrow. We're just getting settled in." "Settled in? You broke in. You're trespassing." "Don't be dramatic," he replied coolly. "This is a family home. We're family. You don't need all that space for yourself." In the background, I heard my father's voice, muffled but clear enough. "Tell her the decision's been made." "You need to leave," I said, my voice shaking with fury. "I'm calling the police if you're not out in 30 minutes. Brian's tone hardened. "That would be a mistake. Calling the police on your own family? Cruel. Besides, Mom and Dad are the real connection to that house, not you." "It's my house," I snapped. "Grandma left it to me." "A technicality," he said flatly. "Anyway, we've already spoken to a lawyer. Grandma was old, not entirely competent. We have a strong case to challenge the will." His words sent ice through my veins. I knew they were bluffing, but the thought of dragging my grandmother's memory into court made me sick. I hung up, booked the next flight home, and spent the night staring at the hotel ceiling, my pulse hammering. When Patrick picked me up from the airport, his face was grim. "They're still there. I drove by. Your dad even told me it was a family matter, and to mind my own business." The cottage came into view as we turned down the familiar road. My heart clenched. My mother's decorative pillows were on the porch swing. My father's golf clubs leaned against the wall. They had settled in like it was theirs. I unlocked the front door with my own key, and the scene inside nearly made me collapse. My carefully arranged living room, rearranged. Boxes stacked in corners. Family photos I had taken down years ago back on the mantel. My grandmother's portrait shoved aside to make room for their wedding picture. My mother emerged from the kitchen, startled. "Adriana, we weren't expecting you until tomorrow." "Clearly," my voice dripped ice. "Where's Dad?" "In the master bedroom, organizing his clothes." The master bedroom, my bedroom. I stormed down the hall and found him hanging his suits in my closet, my clothes shoved aside like clutter. Brian was upstairs in the room above the garage, my office, shoving my design equipment into a corner to make space for his bed. I gathered them all in the living room, Patrick standing firmly at my side. You need to leave, now. Adriana, be reasonable, my father said, using the same tone he had when lecturing me as a child. This arrangement makes sense for everyone. You have this big house all to yourself while we're struggling. That's not my problem, I shot back. You don't even have a real family, my mother hissed suddenly, venom flashing in her eyes. No husband, no children. Just you and your little business. We need this house more than you do. That's not how ownership works, Patrick cut in. This doesn't concern you, my father snapped. Patrick is more family to me than you've ever been, I said, my voice breaking. He didn't abandon me when I was living in my car. Ancient history, Brian muttered, waving a hand. We're here now, ready to be a family again. No, you're here because you want my house. My father's mask slipped, his tone dropping to flat steel. We'll take this house one way or another. We've spoken to a lawyer. We have evidence of your grandmother's decline. We have a strong case. You have nothing, I said coldly, pulling out my phone. But I do. I dialed 911. My mother's eyes widened. Adriana, don't... Family doesn't break into each other's homes, I told her as the dispatcher answered. Yes, this is Adriana Wilson. My parents and brother have broken into my home and are refusing to leave. My father lunged for the phone, but Patrick stepped in front of me. Don't make this worse, he warned him. The 15 minutes before the police arrived felt like hours. My parents sat stone-faced. Brian scrolled his phone. I stood by the door, my whole body trembling. When the officers finally knocked, I handed them my deed and ID. This is my house. They broke in while I was away. The older officer turned to my father. Sir, unless you have proof of legal residence, you need to leave. Now. This is ridiculous, my father spat. She's my daughter. That doesn't give you the right to break into her home, the officer said firmly. You have 30 minutes to collect your belongings, or you'll be arrested for trespassing. My mother's eyes filled with tears. How could you do this to your own parents? I met her gaze steadily, the same way you did it to me when I needed you most. Under police supervision, they packed their boxes back into the car. I stood on the porch with Patrick, watching the taillights fade down the road, my chest aching with a cocktail of grief, fury, and bitter relief. I had defended my house, but I knew this battle wasn't over. Because once someone decides they're entitled to what's yours, they don't stop. They regroup. They come back. The night after the police escorted them out, I sat on the porch swing with Patrick. The air was sharp, the stars indifferent above us. My hands still trembled from adrenaline, my body exhausted, but my mind wouldn't rest. They won't stop, I whispered. I know them. They'll find another way to come after me. Then we'll be ready, Patrick said quietly, his arm wrapping around my shoulders. And he was right. The storm hadn't passed. It was just changing shape. Within days, my lawyer confirmed what I already suspected. Their case against my grandmother's will was baseless. She had been evaluated regularly for cognitive health, and her medical records painted a crystal-clear picture: sound mind, sharp memory, complete awareness when she named me her heir. Still, that didn't stop my family from trying. Brian's text messages, later recovered and shared in court, revealed their plan in detail. They'd intended to move in during my absence, claim emotional duress if I forced them out, and drag me into endless legal battles until I broke. The evidence was damning. My father and Brian faced criminal trespassing charges, ultimately resulting in probation and community service. They still insisted they'd done nothing wrong. My father sneered at the hearings, muttering about family property. Brian scowled, his pride shattered, but never once did he apologize. The only surprise came from my mother. 3 weeks after the court hearings ended, I received a handwritten letter. Adriana, I don't expect forgiveness, but I need you to know. I see now how terribly we failed you. Not just in this, but all your life. When you needed us, we turned you away. There is no excuse for that. I can't undo the past. I can only admit the truth. Her words shook me more than any courtroom verdict. For the first time, she sounded like a woman stripped of defenses, not a mother clinging to pride. I wanted to believe her, but wounds like mine don't heal with a single letter. So I wrote back, briefly, acknowledging her apology without offering reconciliation. Trust could not be rebuilt overnight, not after decades of cracks. In the meantime, I started therapy. For years, I had carried my family's rejection like a stone in my chest. Talking about it, naming it, was both painful and liberating. My therapist's words stayed with me. Family is not defined by blood. It's defined by consistent love, respect, and support. And when I looked around, I realized I already had that. I had Eleanor, who had offered me shelter when I had nothing. I had Patrick, whose steady presence had become the anchor I never thought I'd find. I had neighbors who brought casseroles, colleagues who referred clients, friends who showed up. 1 year after the break-in, Patrick led me into the garden my grandmother once tended. Flowers bloomed where weeds had grown, and the air smelled of earth and new beginnings. He knelt there among the roses, a simple ring in his hand. "You deserve a family who sees your worth," he said softly. "I'd be honored to start that family with you." Tears blurred my eyes. For the first time in my life, I said yes to love without fear of rejection. 6 months later, we married in that same garden. Eleanor stood as my maid of honor, Michael at Patrick's side. My parents and Brian were not invited, a boundary I needed to protect the joy of that day. Instead, I stood surrounded by chosen family, people who had proved their love through actions, not empty words. And with that love, something inside me healed. But I didn't stop there. I knew there were others like me, young adults cut off, abandoned by families for choosing their own paths. I transformed my grandmother's cottage into more than just a home. I established the Margaret Foundation, named for the woman who had taught me that shelter is something you build for yourself. We offered temporary housing in the renovated garage apartment, internships through Elevation Designs, mentorship for students chasing dreams their families refused to support. The first young woman we welcomed was Jamie, a 22-year-old graphic design student whose parents cut her off when she switched majors from business to art. Watching her blossom under guidance reminded me of myself, scared, hungry, determined, clinging to a dream no one else believed in. I gave her a desk beside mine, a bed upstairs, and the words my grandmother once gave me: "Never let anyone else decide your worth." Years passed. My business flourished, my marriage deepened, and the cottage thrummed with life and purpose. I heard whispers of my parents now and then. My father remained bitter, clinging to his pride like armor. Brian moved to another state, rebuilding after financial ruin. My mother left my father, trying to start over on her own. I didn't know if reconciliation would ever come. The door was cracked open, barely, but only if respect replaced manipulation. Until then, I chose peace. One evening, as the sun sank behind the garden, Patrick and I sat on the porch swing, our hands intertwined. The air hummed with crickets, the roses swayed gently, and for once I felt no shadow of fear at my back. "I finally understand," I whispered. "Family isn't the people who share your blood. It's the people who stay when everything else falls apart." He kissed my temple. "And you've built a beautiful one." The girl who once cried herself to sleep in a Walmart parking lot had grown into a woman with a home, a business, a marriage, and a mission. I had defended not just a house, but my worth. And in the end, that was the victory my family could never take from me.